components of the shortfall is that we just recently financed over 10 years the public safety communications upgrade, the tower that's going into Public Works Yard, the radios, and the dispatch equipment. So it's a $3.1 million project. We financed it over 10 years, and so we've got some one-time funds that we anticipate coming in to help offset that.
It's a $3.1 million project
that is not reflected here,
and so
that will be good news.
We've got some
future as we
one-time
get that
funds that we anticipate coming in to help offset that.
And then we have what we call the operational surplus shortfall.
So
in 1819,
good news. Got some one-time we get that funds that we anticipate coming in to help offset that. And we have what we call the operational surplus shortfall. So in 1819, good news. Got some one-time.
These are the numbers
that we anticipate coming in.
in 1819, which is an ending fund balance of $2.3 million. The blue bar you can see continues over time to erode, and the benefit of the long-range planning process is that, as you can see, here we are today, we're anticipating 3.6. This is not a cliff. This is a gradual decline that we're addressing now and have been addressing over the last year to say we need to do something different than what we're doing. What do we do about it? Rather than this getting caught in an annual cycle where all of a sudden you realize, oh, we're short.
So the next part of this, and one of the key points, so that we actually have some recommendations for you to look at and for the public to consider, looks at the general fund and what are the single or the 2 or 3 largest expenditures in the general fund. Overwhelmingly, public safety, meaning police and communications, are what comes out of the general fund. We also have library, that comes out of the general fund, and certain kinds of planning. So one that I'm suggesting here that we consider is the role of property taxes to what people feel like they are contributing to the city finances, and how does that sit? What do they give us in money, and how does that compare to what I believe people will say is their number one service in the general fund? And of course, we'll ask that. So what you see up there is the amount of money that we anticipate collecting this next year. Now that we have lost the revenues, or we've taken the revenues out from TVF&R, we expect to receive in property tax $4,400,000, about $4.5 million. So that means if we look at every resident in town, each one of you, and say, if all of the money, every single cent that you give to the city in property tax is represented to there, then we say, okay, now how does that compare to public safety? Now the police and communications receives not just property tax, they're not just in the general fund, but they receive some outside monies. And that can be things like a contract that we have with Dundee. It can mean funds like some portion of fines that come in, because there's some claims against that, of course, some. But you have fines that come in. It can also be funding for 911 that comes from the state. If you strip those all out, meaning that if you take 911 revenues and put it against some 911 expenditures, the net cost of the police department is what you see up there of $7.5 million, 7.6. So you sit here and you think, okay, to a resident, every single dollar If it comes in and it only goes to one source, it's 4.5 million. The cost of the existing police department, not an enhanced one, but the existing is 7.5. So we're 3 million away from what property taxes generate that would go towards police. I think that's a pretty strong, it's a telling statistic. So if you say, what do you think, if there was nothing else the city did and you only had $5 and you wanted to give it to the city to do something with, to keep for your family, I think it's going to probably be public safety. You know, we want to save safe. There's also the part of ambulances, but that's separate from all this discussion, and we're paying $1.88. But if you have that $5 and you say something like, okay, I'll take $1.88 and give it to the fire department for fire and medic, and I'll take $3 of it if you were going to do that, it doesn't come to even 50% of what it costs to run the police department. Now, this assumes all of it, not the $1.88. It says every cent from a taxpayer in the city, property taxpayer, would come up with 4.4. Now, someone goes, well, wait a minute, you're not bankrupt yet. I heard you're short of money, but you're not bankrupt. So how can you pay $7.5 million and the total amount that all of us pay is 4.4? There are other funds that we receive. The most obvious one are things like the privilege tax, franchise fees. Those monies go into the general fund, and that allows us to have a balanced budget. But when someone says, you know, I'm giving you property tax money, and you know, and it's a lot, and I want it to go to the right services, it's 4.4, 4.5 against 7.5. Okay. That was 2018-19. Now you go through and describe just the next year, if you can. What are they looking at there?
So in a similar fashion, the numbers have changed, but again, as you see on the teeter-totter, basically the services that are being paid for by property tax dollars still are outstripping the value. And so these numbers are identical to the graph that you saw earlier as far as the cost of services.
So that's the simple state of where we are with property taxes in the general fund. So what we want to do is we're going to recommend to you a couple of alternatives. And the two main alternatives involve asking you and then asking voters or asking the public about generating new monies from them, from each of us if you're a taxpayer in town. Those two alternatives in the revenue side, one could be increasing the property tax levy or increasing the public safety fee. Now, you say, oh, that increase in the public safety fee, was that included in the revenues of the last one? Yes, it was. And that's what I said, net out the police department. So public safety fees were already accounted for in the last slide. So what you're going to hear from us is a recommendation on revenues of either increasing property tax or increasing public safety fee. And we're going to talk about how much in a second. Now, could you do a little bit of this and a little bit of that? Yes, you could. Our recommendation, or at least forethought, is that I think that we can make a case to people and try to keep it as simple as possible, is one or the other and not both. Tigard, for a lot of different reasons, just recently went through a levy, and they're identical. Permanent levy is the same amount of ours, of $2.50, and they went to their voters and said, we have needs in the general fund, and then they had one other fund, transportation. They had needs, and they said, we don't have enough money to pay for the level of services that you would like, Tigard resident. And so they asked for a levy, but they said some of it would go to police, Some of it would go to sidewalks, transportation. Some of it would go to library, and I believe the last one was some of it to go for parks. It failed. And part of the kind of debriefing that and talking to the people, they said, we probably asked for too many things, so that some people were in favor of the library, but when they prioritized in their own mind and said, I only have so much money to give to the city, well, you asked me for, say, $5, and, oh, if all 5 could go to one of them, all right. But if you're asking me for 5 and then you decide, and you even split it up to maybe 4 for police and 1 for library and 1 for sidewalk, that did not resonate. So our recommendation to you is to consider one service out of the general fund and to just fund one or the other. So up there talks a little bit about a process, and the next slide talk about what kinds of dollars that might. This one at the beginning talks about 2 revenues. This doesn't, on this slide, talking about cutting services, but like in any discussion, I know people would say, well, this is my budget at home, and I see where my end goal is, and maybe I'll raise some money, maybe I'll sell something on eBay, to come up with something, but I may have to cut some services. So that will be part of the discussion, both with you and getting direction for us, and going to the public to ask them. But the primary ask to you is, or the beginning is to say revenue, trying to raise more revenue. Now, these 2 alternatives, we're going to go through the pros and cons, ask you, and then ask you for, our plan is to go to the public and ask them a couple of things, both in the citizen survey that you have up there that can be done online, and in addition to that, focus groups that are modeled after TVF&R's effort on the annexation. So the analogy to TVF&R is they said, we have a challenge. We want to provide medical and fire services in the town, and we don't have enough money to do that. So public, the taxpayer in Newberg, we know it's very difficult. We're asking you to take an alternative rather than enhancing or putting more money into the fire service, that we would like you to go with TVF&R. And they went in 2 different groups, one doing a focus group that mirrored the typical taxpayer inside Newberg, so that they were getting responses from the people that typically vote in our town. That costs some money. In their case, it was as much as $40,000 to do these focus groups. And they asked that group, and then based on the results of the first focus group, they came up with some questions. And if you remember back there, and we would expect to find similar questions for us, they said things like, well, you're going to use the money for what again? Okay, we think we understand it's for fire and medical services. Okay, you're going to keep the fire stations here? Okay, that was a question they didn't know. Is Metro government going to come in because we're annexing? And they realized that was a concern that they answered on the following one. And are you going to, with this cost, how much does it cost? And am I going to pay double taxes? They got those kinds of concerns during these 2 surveys. So our suggestions, first I'm coming out and suggesting 2 revenue, and then asking people, and during their surveys, and we have draft of surveys to present and talk about, is to say, what if you had only 1 service, or you had 2, and this was similar to what TVF&R did. If you remember, TVF&R said, how do you feel about fire service? How do you feel about police service? How do you feel about library services? Because they are all really general fund. We'd ask the same kinds of questions there and ask, what is your priority? And then we would bring that back to you. So we think that this survey information would occur there's a calendar on the next slide, that somewhere after August through early fall. And then based on those results, and we'll feed you as we go along or provide the information to you and everyone else, that we get into the fall and then say, we want direction about if we go to the voters. If you agree that the voters say it's a good idea to ask them for money, then once you make that decision, we'll show where it might fit in an election schedule, and then have to go from this information gathering step to like a political action group or another group that would take on the cause of raising monies. So now let's go to the next one. So to start the discussion, and this, we put these numbers up here for ease of trying to understand in our own mind. We are not talking about 1.9 million up there. If you saw in the handouts, we're talking about 1.4 million. But we said, okay, for ease on a tax bill, if we went to the voters and asked for $1, so right now we're at $2.50 coming to the city. If we asked for one additional dollar, that would generate 1.9 million. Now that's more than what we need. So is that probably the way high end and stuff? Yeah, it is. But for ease of understanding. So in our town right now, a typical home is the assessed value of a typical home is about $250,000. Of course you can't buy a home for $250,000 here. Market value is more, but we're assessed our tax on market value. So if we added $1, it would cost a resident $1 times 254. So that's for ease of looking at. Now, we collect right now a public safety fee. We're going to go through in more detail the pros and cons of property tax versus public safety fee. The biggest difference between those two people paying it is on the top one, property tax, there is a group in our town, a category that are tax exempt, that don't pay property taxes. And we'll go into detail. The obvious one is George Fox, but there are a lot of other kinds of tax exempt property. We can go through that. The second one is we have an existing public safety fee of $5. Part of that pays for dispatchers' communication, which is part of public safety, and part for a police officer. Just for comparison, and that's all this is up there, is if you wanted to generate the same amount of money as $1 in property tax, it would be $19 additional onto the public safety fee. So you'd add the $5 plus 19. So that's just for purposes of comparison. Let's go to the next. So then we said this is not a short process. It is a process that really can go multiple years. And if you accept the premise of going to the public in an election, and you're going to see on the next calendar what our recommendation right now, we haven't got all the input from the people, but right now I'd be looking at next spring. And I'll show you that calendar, next spring for a bunch of reasons that I'll cover in a second. But then we'd go, if the voters say no to that, they said, we've heard the talk about should we either, whatever is presented to them, could be a property tax, could be a public safety fee, it could be something else, even though there's not a real obvious one. But if it's one of those and they say no, then what happens? Well, you remember on the first chart that we'll still have, if nothing happens, a substantial ending fund balance that can get us through for next year. We're not in the red. Is it less than this year? Of course it is. Is that conservative? Yes, it is, because it doesn't include the sale of the property across the street and the animal shelter. So that will be raised up. The point of that is to say that we have time to work through this, go to the voters and ask, and react. But if we go to next spring, which is what we're proposing to you, and they say no, okay, then one response right there will be, well, we can reduce programs. The number one service in the general fund is police, public safety, police and fire. So we would propose some reduction in the programs, and we'd bring that back to you. So it could be something in police department, have one officer gone, or some function. We would present that to you. And the logic to there is that if we ask voters, what's your primary, what do you want to pay property taxes with, and they say no, one response I think that we owe is to say, well, here could be the impact on the police department. Now, at the next meeting, we'll have a discussion that would be before this of dispatch, which is also part of public safety. But we've had that discussion, and we'll have numbers to see what the impact of dispatch. But in addition to that, and you go, well, okay, the people just don't want to pay the levy amount or the public safety fee that's being presented, so as a council and a budget committee, we want to cut something else. Everything with all of this stuff is on the table. And that principle of transparency that you saw in the first one then says that we will analyze and look at every service we have. I think that we're pretty lean over the last 4 or 5 years in just responding to other financial, the downturn and some changes. We've cut back, but anything is open, and that could be any of the programs we have, and we'll be prepared. We don't have detail right now, but we'd be prepared to talk about reductions in any of those areas. And then in addition to programs, which is probably the most effective and the easiest way to talk to people about alternatives, you say, what do you want your money to go for, which service, and if you don't do that, well, do we cut that or some other services? But there's other things that always come up in conversations during budgets and tight budget stuff, and those are up there. It can be things like employees increasing to their health plan, to the medical plan. And we have all those, we have numbers, and we're prepared to talk about. They're not huge numbers compared to the million, but each of those we're able to talk about. We have a dollar amount and all of the positions laid out that we added 2 years ago, 6 positions, and which one have an impact on the general fund. Because in all those 6 positions that we added, not all of them are general fund. And some of those positions, and probably the most dramatic example is a planner, that a planner comes out of the general fund, but the planner generates a tremendous amount of money. And he or she, in this case, our last hire, she'll generate more in revenues than it costs to pay for her salaries and benefits because of the development boom that we're into. And we have all those numbers to share. And then there's things like hiring freeze and eliminating COLA. One of the things you saw in the principles is the goal of all this is to look long-term, 5 years, 6 years. A hiring freeze and a COLA are more of 1-year fixes. They're not really the long-term. And so we'll show that and describe each one of them in detail. Do you want to do this? You want me to do it? Oh, why don't you go for it? I'm tired of hearing me talk.
So as Joe described multiple times, this is a sample time frame over the next year as to what we're talking about. Here we are on the left this evening, our council work session discussing this very topic. We, after hearing from you, getting some feedback, what information would you like to have, come back to you in a month and answer the questions that you've got. And then over the next 3 months, September through November, go through the public informative process using the same type of format that TVFNR used of focus groups, town halls, surveys, and then looking essentially for a council decision November 18. And some of that all plays into the election cycle, so you do have some some lead times that you have to address. By the end of the fiscal year, by the end of the calendar year, in December 18, we would look to come back to you with fresh numbers and see what the current situation still is. Of course, we will continue to monitor that as we go. But generally, towards the end of the year, we start to get into the January through April of 2019 process where we're preparing for the next year's budget. The goal of having the long-range financial plan in writing would, at a minimum, cover the funds that feed into the general fund. And again, there's 6 or 7 that affect that process. And then also, what policies does the council want to have in play to help guide that ongoing revenue stream or expense reduction? So, and then should the council decide to go ahead and put a revenue enhancement to the voters, May 19 is when the proposal is for that. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the election cycle. Okay.
Why May?
So May of 19 would eliminate the need for a double majority vote. So it'd be a simple majority, and it would produce the most flexibility for the city in getting the results. So alternatively, a November of 18 would be another option. That's a little bit soon, and it also kind of curtails the public involvement process. So that's why we're proposing the May 19 vote.
And a May vote would not require additional, like special elections, where we had that was going to be about $20,000 for an election. It always depends on who's there, but there it's a set election time that we don't have to pay additional.
So a lot of yeah, I'm not going to ask if there's any questions because I know who asks that question. However, we are looking for input, feedback. Drinking through a fire hose for the last 40 minutes. We would like to come back to you at the August 20th meeting and bring additional information and more specific. We can answer questions this evening, and so that is our staff presentation.
Well, I see some lights, and we'll start with Councilor Johnson, and we'll work our way around.
Good evening. Thank you for the presentation. First question I had is I did some quick math, and we just got this tonight. I've seen versions of it, but the trend of the need looks to be about, on average, if you add those up, it's about 1.5. And yet we're saying our shortfall is 1.4. And then our revenue examples are 1.9. And so I was just curious how you're going to make all those numbers jive before we roll this out to the public. That's
a great observation. The 1.4 is essentially the 18-19 shortfall.
Mm-hmm.
We were focusing on that. The 19-20 shortfall would be 1.5, 1.6, just due to general inflation and other costs continuing to rise. The 1.9 million was meant as a rule of thumb. Hey, cocktail napkin, $1 property tax would generate about 1.9 next year. So obviously to meet the 1.4, 1.5, we'd be asking for a rate less than $1. So 85 cents, 80 cents, something like that.
So I'll follow on one might. And I have several, if that's all right, Mr. Mayor. My advice would be that before we start any public information campaign, I noticed with Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, we had some different numbers bouncing around, whether that was public misunderstanding or whatever. I would suggest that we have these numbers locked down as to exactly what the need is and exactly what we're asking for, because this makes me nervous when I see 3 different numbers for what we're doing, and that's just the PR guy in me coming out, okay? My second question is, did you take in future growth into consideration when doing the revenue, and at what rate, or were you looking at current projects on the books or riverfront, or did you take the situation, or did you just say flat 2% or whatever that growth rate was.
Some of the assumptions that we used, particularly around property taxes, we used a 4.3% tax assessed value growth, which has been generally what it's been over the last couple of years. It's been up as high as 5.3, it's been as low as in the ones. So it is a assumption, assumed rate that we're using. We continue to look at our growth and determine whether or not that is going to be, the 4.3, for example, represents a 3% statutory growth or average growth, and the additional 1.3 represents, hey, new tax property coming onto the tax rolls. That being said, let me just share with you what that assumption really does. If the growth was 10%, well, let me give you a rule of thumb. Every 1% increase in property tax value generates about $45,000 to the city. So even if the growth was as high as 10%, which I've never seen, it would not impact, it would not cut into the fund. So we can't grow our way out of this situation. So the assumptions that we use, back to your question about the assumption, those assumptions are well laid out in the model, and in the past I believe we've shared some of those as we've gone through different scenarios. There are other assumptions like cost of living of 2%. There are some major costs that we know about. There's some that we don't. We're making assumptions about future PERS rates. We're making assumptions about health, and those are some of the primary drivers as well. So.
Okay. And then my last one, Mr. Mayor. On the slide with the teeter-totter, you mentioned that the public safety fee was included in there, and I was curious, did you discount it from the cost side, or did you include it in the property tax revenue side, just out of curiosity, the current public safety fee?
Let me explain how the public safety fits into this. The public safety fee essentially is in its own fund. It's not a part of the general fund. So it's, to a certain level, it is self-sustaining as, at this point, for example, we use the patrol officers. There's 3 patrol officers and 2 dispatchers. That fee goes into its own unique fund, and there are 5 personnel that are funded out of that. Those numbers aren't reflected here.
Okay. Because it's
It's essentially net zero.
Okay.
It will get compressed over time, but that's how the public safety fee fits into there. So if the public safety fee was to be increased, the mechanics of that, it would still remain in its own separate fund, but costs from the general fund that are there today would be moved over. Yeah. So it would relieve the pressure in the general fund.
So the short answer is it's just not in the cost side.
Correct.
Okay, great.
And I can, if anybody, this is, again, in the spirit of transparency, all of these numbers are straight up from the 18-19 budget and beyond. So.
Great.
Councilor Corey, Councilor McKinney.
Yes, I appreciate your questions. Some of them I had, so I'll move on to others. Appreciate you talking about the dispatch presentation in the meeting in August. That was one of my questions. So I just wanted to ask, is the city side of the dispatch center cost-wise, we have 1.374 up here, but we also have upgrades to do. So I want to make sure the report includes all the upgrades that are anticipated for the dispatch center in addition to that number there. Okay, thank you. Another idea, and it's a drop in the bucket, basically, short term, would be stop all vehicle purchases, but I know that that's not a biggie, and it's certainly a short-term idea, but it is another way to generate possibly some income. I also, you said the town hall meetings are going to be scheduled for September through November, in that range? Perfect. And my suggestion on that is to have the surveys like you had there, but also is it possible to make it electronic as well, so folks can get on and then encourage people to, put their ideas on the survey electronically, because that's what a lot of people do these days. So that is in the work?
That's the plan.
Okay.
Is
Thank
to
you.
make the surveys electronic. We hadn't
Oh,
really,
it's all gonna
we
be
hadn't really
electronic?
thought about going, I mean, we can do that paper. We can, figure out, is there a value of sending it to every person in town?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that there was a value that TVF&R found, and this is where a lot of their cost was, is they bring a person in that looks at all of our taxing rolls and says, who votes and where do they live and what are their demographics? And since they might not be able to get 6,000 people to ask each one, they figure out Johnny Jones that lives at this address in town fits the typical voter. And so for that person, they do the focus. They invite them in and they say, here's what we're thinking. What do you think? And that helps inform. And it seems to work during elections. That's the typical person. Now, the surveys can be sent to just selected people or to everyone. We'll bring the costs back if we want to do it something other than electronic.
So then the town hall meetings, so there's going to be focus groups and town hall meetings, or just town hall meetings open to all citizens?
No,
How's
both.
that? What's the idea?
So the thinking is that, and this came out of the last even discussion that we had, and I think Councilmember Johnson was saying, is that, if we're going to people and asking them their opinions, one way is to do the survey, but another way is, and whether it was modeled after the Tough, but more after the annexation, that we advertised the town hall, told what the issue was, or TVF&R did that, and then if you remember, if you were there, people came in at the fire station and said, here's our opinion. So we got to hear that. The idea of the August, September, October is to get that information to you before we're asking you to make a decision in November. Now,
Thanks.
granted, it doesn't have to happen in November. It could happen in October, could happen in November, it could happen in December, January. The idea is that whatever direction you give to staff of leaving us enough time to be able to inform all voters of this is what you're being asked to vote on before May, and the election in May, but then you work your way back from that, is that we're mail-in stuff. So how many days or months and what kinds of holidays and seasons do people need or want before they're asked to vote?
No, I think that's a great idea, and as far as, now this is strictly me on the council, you ask whether, what I thought, or we thought, should be the road ahead, whether to go for a tax increase, go for a public safety fee increase. My opinion right off is the tax increase would be by far the best way to do it, rather than go for another public safety fee on the utility bill again, which, I'm hearing constantly that is, like overblown already. I mean, people are just, not understanding why they have to pay so much on that utility bill. Even though it's listed out, I understand. For us, we understand, but the citizens would have a real problem, I think, with $19 increase on their utility bill. So I'm just saying, I think the tax increase is the best focus to have. And let the public decide, though, on these focus groups and surveys and stuff. That is a good question. Which way do they want to do it? I think the public should decide that in the long run. And the same thing with the cuts. If there is decision to cuts, let the citizens again decide what is going to be cut, which I think you've said that that's kind of what you had in mind. So, and the last last statement is really not a question, but the asking for 1.9 million, in my opinion, is prudent because of the future. Again, we're talking long-term. We're not talking about just next year. We're talking about the other deficits that are going to be the year after and the year after and the year after. So I think 1.9 million is a good number to have, even though right now our deficit is 1.4. But I understand the future is not going to work unless we go for, I don't want to have to do this again, is my point. A one-time thing.
Councilor McKinney?
Well, I appreciate Mike's statement here. A one-time thing just seems like an impossibility here. How many votes? I mean, I'm looking at a graph that projects it out to 22, 23. How many times are you going to have to go to the voters and ask for an increase in their property tax bill if they're here? When we begin with $1, and then if it goes to the $1.88 that was cut out for TVF&R, but then it appears to me that it's not very many years out to where the increase needs to be substantially more than $1.88, per thousand somewhere. How many votes is $1 per thousand an annual thing, or does it project out, for several years or whatever? You've got a number of years of deficits here, and I see suggestions on taking care of the next immediate need of 1.4, but you have substantial needs greater than 1.4 over the next coming years here. And then the likelihood of voters saying no. What's the plan there?
Well, pull up the tool, please. Well, first, the tool, and I appreciate of what Councilor Johnson was saying, don't have numbers, multiple numbers. For tonight, we use the $1. Is that fine, Mayor? Answering that? His question?
Go ahead.
Okay. The $1 is just, it's easy to tell the impact of property taxes that way, $1 versus our assessed. That's why it's up there. I think that needs more refinement and a discussion both with you and then potentially with the public. We can't build ourselves out of the deficit, but there are additional funds that come in. And for example, and they're programmed into this model that talk about that for every new resident that comes here, they also generate money like electricity and cable, which then is taxed through the privilege taxes, which comes into the general fund. So we don't think that that what we're going to recommend to you is going to cause us to come back 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. We cannot predict with certainty, even reasonable certainty, after 5 years. We'll show trends each year. We're going to have it, updated, but the number will last for. I don't see it as like, oh, we're coming back for whatever 1.4 million here, and then 2 or 3 years we're going to ask for more. One thing we'll go into more detail if you wish, which makes sense, and education will make sense of. As this new population comes on board, we do know at some point, and we're not adding anything to this model until at least 3 years out, there might be a need for additional police officers, for example. We have those numbers, program into the model, and we'll show you how that goes. I think might be very instructive now or helpful, and we can do it quickly, is that this tool that Matt has developed with the rest of the finance is interactive. So he can show you right now, just for example, what happens if the property tax levy is increased by $1. So if you look at C where the gap is between revenues and expenditures up there, and then in a few seconds, he'll add the dollar in, and you can see what happens to it. So now, looking at that same chart over there, you can see where the line of revenues and expenditure with a dollar added. And we can do that with any expenditure line or revenue line to see what the impact is.
Well, that slide's a little bit encouraging there. We do know that the police department's coming up with a plan and a methodology for the additional officers that they projected what the need's going to be to have the Newberg, Dundee Police Department and some of the other things here. I wish I was more encouraged about this process. Is there going to be a need for future or additional fees as well as a tax increase? Will it end up being one or the other, or a hybrid of both?
My recommendation right now, that's the whole point for having the discussion tonight and with the public, is to not try to close this gap with additional. Now, that being said, you took a big step earlier, and that is already in this model of taking the franchise fee, the one on our own utility of the 3 water, storm, and sewer, and going from 5% to 7%. That was a small step, but over time, that makes significant contributions here, which means that we don't even ask even on one thing of increasing property taxes greater. It's built into this, which also means that it's not another fee, it's not a higher fee, but over time, new people come to town, and these new homes that come on, they do create some demand for services, and that's police is probably the biggest one, but then they generate money in their water and sewer bills, and that comes into this, and every 6 months, every year, we show those trends to reflect on here. Tonight, you probably don't want to hear it, but a big part of this, and we'll go into much more detail because it's a difficult concept, is that we're showing all those projections as if when a budget is passed, that what you have authorized to be spent is spent in that year. The history and the reality of it, that never happens. We never spend, for all kinds of reasons, we never spend all of the revenues. That money then goes into the ending fund balance. We show that. We have charts to do the trends. That's also why, right sitting here this moment, that we have projected ending fund balance, but we know based on every sense of history that in 2 years from now, it's not going to remain at 5. If we follow anything like history, that will be a greater ending fund balance, which gives the council an opportunity to react if for some reason the voters say, no, I don't want to do that, or not at those dollar amounts. So we're not in a panic mode, and that's the idea of long-range planning. So no, I don't think that we're going to come back with additional fees. Are there some out there in the revenue sphere of the city? There are a few. There's a restaurant tax in Ashland. There's an admissions tax that has been charged at some places. There is now a sales tax in Ontario. All those have interesting, possibilities and legal, restrictions on them. That's not what's being proposed here. We always will have those information and we'll provide them to you and anyone else. But that's not what we're proposing to close the gap. We're proposing that wherever you go, that we settle on one tool. Now, that's also a political decision and public asking. For example, when we did the TBF&R and asked them about, hey, if some of the money, was held back, would you pay for police or library or this service, streets? And they said, in the first go-round, the focus group, they said, oh, I'm okay that some funds, up to some amount, could be held back for police, but not library or not streets. I think that, as you give us direction of which way we want to go, we will put that as part of the survey question that we ask people about, their opinion.
Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it very much. I want to make a statement here, and what I want to do is I want to thank those budget committee members that are with us in this, attending this evening to get an idea. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate it very much. Question of staff. As you're looking at the sending out the survey and the focus groups, are you sensitive to having those scheduled before or after the mailing of the tax statements by the county? That may be something that you want to take under advisement. And you were talking about long-range impact and short-range solutions and what have you, and you were saying the 5-year horizon. One of the concerns that I would have is that there be a good examination, a thorough examination of long-range impact of any of the short-range solutions. And I would consider, really in some ways, I'd consider a 5-year horizon a bit of it's a mid-range, but not a long-range area. And one other one that I have, maybe two here, is I'm confused. You did a good job on that. Thank you. As an example, you show the court in here as part of our public safety costs. Perhaps it's, I've been having head in the sand or whatever the case may be, but I thought our court operation was basically revenue neutral. And maybe I don't understand what you're trying to say is net of cost. So
the way that we've shown the numbers on that graph with the court, dispatch, and police, the primary revenue that comes in that's not property taxes in the police department is traffic fines. And that represents $475,000 to $500,000 a year. That is boiled into the net cost of the police department. And so the court is expenses that are required to process those traffic fees, but the revenue has been attributed, right, wrong, or indifferent, you can slice it either way, attributed to the general fund, but as police revenue. So it's all in the same bucket, but the traffic fines have been, in that model, reduced the police cost to come up with that net of 5.9 million or whatever that number was. So if you were to take the traffic revenue of 500,000 and say that is court revenue, then you'd have more revenue than the court costs are, which is about $320,000. It's just a matter of choice as to whose revenue you assign that to. Does that make sense?
no, but go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we'll come back at the next.
Do you understand it, Mike? All right.
We'll come back to the next meeting and try to be able to describe that. Because if it's not clear here, it's not going to be clear with the public.
And you did a good job, and I think it's another one that needs to be continually examined, and that's the issue of a fee versus a property tax and the implication that it has on the payer. And I sincerely appreciate the concerns expressed about the heavy burden that our municipal services billing is creating. But I'm also looking at a broad base that we spread the costs to those that are actually benefiting from the services. So I'm struggling with that part. Thank you again for your presentation. Are there any further comments or questions for staff at this time? So we will have chapter 2 next month. Okay, on the 20th.
In the general portion of the meeting.
During our business meeting. Thank you. Okay. With that, is there anything further to come before us? Did you have anything else right now? City Attorney? Nothing more? Okay. If there's nothing further to come before us, we are going to be in recess for 10 minutes, and we will reconvene in our business section. seats, please. I welcome you to the Newberg City Council business session for July 16, 2018. May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Mayor, all present with the exception of Councilor Essen, who is absent.
Thank you. Would you please rise for a pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On the agenda tonight, and one of the pleasures that I have, and I've said this before as mayor, is our proclamations and the recognizing of activities and peoples, etc., in our community. In this evening, I would like to share a proclamation declaring July 26 through 29 as Newberg Old Fashioned Festival Week. Whereas, I'm going to back off for just a moment. I keep doing this, and shame on me. I will entertain a motion that we accept the proclamation. So moved. It's been moved?
Second.
And seconded that we accept the proclamation. Do I hear any discussion? The question has been called for. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. None appearing? So be it. So, if I may, I keep forgetting to do that. On this proclamation, whereas the city of Newberg is a family-friendly and inclusive community that hosts many gatherings, numerous celebrations, and a variety of entertainment venues where old friends and new ones can get together. And whereas each year the city of Newberg and many members of the community participate by celebrating community spirit during the last full weekend of July. And with that, I would like to invite, so that we recognize them, I would like to invite the court if they would join me up front. And these are the young ladies who will represent the city of Newberg. There you go. That will represent the city of Newberg in our old-fashioned festival that we have coming up. The city of Newberg Public Works, Newberg Dundee Police Department, and the city's community engagement specialist, Ms. Rosa Oliveras, participate in many ways that welcome the community and visitors to join the Newberg Old Fashioned Festival activities and enjoy the camaraderie and sense of community built by festival. And to this extent, and whereas this year is the inaugural participation of 12 Newberg Hispanic community members, including the community's city community engagement specialist, Rosa, constituting the International Stage Committee. And I would like to have that committee stand, if you would, please. Thank you. And whereas the Newberg Old Fashioned Festival adds two new activities, the Old Fashioned Festival Friday night, which reels in the participation of the downtown local business, and the cycle cart show introducing Newberg and visitors to the world of scaled-down version of historic automobiles. And whereas, marking the year 2018 as the 38th annual anniversary year of the festival, a special time for everyone involved in this event. The theme this year is Back to the Beach. Now therefore, it is proclaimed by myself and the City Council of the City of Newberg that July 26 through 29, 2018 is hereby designated Newberg Old Fashioned Festival Week in the City of Newberg. In witness whereof, I have set my hand in the seal of the City of Newberg for this proclamation. And I share that with you, and you share that with your ladies. Thank you very much. And thank you.
And with that, we will move to the city manager's report, please.
Mayor and Council, Joe Hannon, your city manager. I've emailed you the full report that I'll just present briefly now to you and to the press. Last week, kind of a short, over the last 2 weeks, a big part of that, I was gone for 4 days at an Oregon City Manager Association. Once a year, the professional organization gets together, has some professional training, and then shares a lot of notes about what's happening in different cities. And that just helps us connect and don't make the same mistakes that somebody else might have gone down the road. A lot of what's being talked about now across cities is affordable housing, how people are dealing with ADUs. We're right in the middle of that, and so are most other cities. Some of it's brought on by the legislative changes, but people are working on ADUs and how they fit in with affordable housing. There's some other things that you saw on the League of Oregon Cities, the request of issues that are not something that quite obvious, but that now Doug and Jay Harris are getting into for us, and that's a small cell deployment. And later on, we could spend some time talking about it, but that's a effort, and it's cell deployment around, particularly when we look at one of the developments tonight of these entirely new communities, that people are looking at a different way of using the cell and Wi-Fi technology. So there's coming. And then a lot of discussion about the impacts of Airbnb and vacation rentals on neighborhoods and on revenues. So a lot of that was talked about. And then just an interesting one, which we'll start sharing little by little, but the future is here in a lot of the cities in terms of artificial intelligence, both unmanned vehicles. You go, what? That they've come to some cities, they're working on ordinances with that, and a lot of changing technology using artificial intelligence for figuring out where police go, finding the hot spots, and then things like customer service that now the first city has come out where you don't even see a person. You come in and you talk to an artificial intelligence person that can do everything from work through a customer service bill on the water to putting in a new service. So more to come on that area. We continue to monitor the mills sale activity. A lot of interest in that in the press and with legislators and stuff. Still, our single point of contact for sorting through all that and maintaining a contact with both the broker that's involved in the mill and then ultimately with the owners, Westrock, is Doug Rux. So there's nothing new. The paper has some things that are out there, but it's a ongoing, fluid, and kind of an energetic process right now that's going on with the mill. On the good news, and the ladies just left, but the chaperone for the Old Fashioned Festival is Brian Love's wife, and Brian is the chair of our Citizens Committee. So we have about, is it 30 people? How many? 16 people that are actively working on what is our vision for the community of the mill property. So that's about what will happen to the mill. We don't own it, but this is what we're looking to talk to other people and really how can we bring more jobs back into Newberg. So that's going on right now. Did a meet and greet with the new chamber director, talk about common interest and partnerships, and of course their existing contract between the city and the chamber, and then the Newberg school superintendent. So we start out with the first hour of conversation. We have about 2 more hours to go through. And those issues are everything such as partnership with the police department, how the city, Unidos, and the police department, school district can work together. What's the future of Edwards School? How can we look at land use? How can we joint do emergency preparedness? How can we help them with projections of how many students they're going to have next year? What's the future? And really asking for additional funding for the SROs at the police department, but a whole series of items. And so we started today and we've got other sessions that will come back. And then I'll report back those to the council, including, as we did last year, a joint meeting between the council and the school district to look at issues. A big part of, Matt has taken this long-range financial plan, but before we get to these meetings, it's to work through that, and Matt and the finance staff are kind of like, okay, let's look at these presentation proposals to get them to you, to provide you with alternatives, so then we can then get the direction and your advice and stuff to come back to eventually go to the public. So that was a big part of the time. Also participated with the Lodging Tax Committee, and they're working hard at bringing back, proposal on tourism marketing. And finally, we've got scope of services done and a draft that I get to the attorney tomorrow of a contract for the management director's training to work on that. And that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions or comments for the city manager? None appearing. We have some council appointments, and I am going to ask that you consent to my reappointment. Members to the Citizens Rate Review Committee for reappointment: Holly Bradford, Adam Lundstrom, and Nick Morris, for the terms effective immediately, and they will expire on June 30, 2020.
So moved.
It has been moved
Second.
to consent to that. It has been seconded. Any further discussion? The question's been called for. No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. None. Motion carries. And if you would hold for just a moment, please. I need to catch up here a little bit. And I have, do we have any of those people with us this evening that we'd like to recognize? Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it, your willingness to do that again. Appreciate it very much. The other one is I'm looking to, and I will move the appointment of Rebecca Radcliffe to position 4, effective July 18 through June 30, 2022, to the Newberg Public Library. It's been moved and seconded to appoint Rebecca Radcliffe to the Library Board. Is there any further discussion? The question's been called for. No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. None appearing. Motion carries. Yes, I was going to ask that. Would Rebecca say hi to us and thank you? We appreciate your willingness. We definitely appreciate your willingness to serve on our library board. And Rebecca's filling an unusual position. We have one position by ordinance that allows people in the overall service area, not just a resident of Newberg. There's one person on the library board can be a non-resident, and Rebecca happens to be that person this year. Thank you for your time. We appreciate your willingness to serve. With that, I'm prepared to move into the area of public comments. What have you got? Hang on, time out.
It's for the public hearing.
Time back in. We got that one squared away. We have nobody signed up for general public comments, so I'm going to open and close the public comment period, and we move to the consent calendar. Pleasure of the council.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
That one I think I'll give to Corey. I think he beat you. Light or no light. Second, Corey. All right. Is there any further discussion? Question has been called for. There being no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. None appearing. The consent calendar is adopted. And with that, we will now move into the area of public hearings. And we have tonight, I gotta get myself here. We have a quasi-judicial hearing this evening. This is not a legislative, this is a quasi-judicial. And this is a hearing considering the adoption of ordinance 2018-2835, approving the 2018 amendment to the 2008 Development Agreement Springbrook Master Plan that was adopted by ordinance 2007-2678. With that, I'm going to call on if there are any abstentions, biases, ex parte contact that you have had, or conflicts of interest, or objections to jurisdiction on the part of the council. None appearing. City Attorney.
Certain announcements are required before the commencement of a quasi-judicial land use hearing. The hearing tonight deals with the 2018 amendment to the 2008 Development Agreement to the Springbrook Master Plan, which was previously adopted by ordinance number 2007-2678. The announcement required by the Oregon Revised Statutes is as follows. Number one, the applicable substantive criteria for the decision are listed in the council packet, primarily Exhibit B to the ordinance, starting on page 19, as well as Attachment 8. Number two, testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the criteria described above or other criteria in the plan or land use regulation that you believe applies to this decision. Number three, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. 4, failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. And the citation is ORS 197, 763 sub 5, and 796 sub 3 sub B. The applicant who has the burden of proof may have at least 7 days after the record is closed to submit final written argument. At the close of the testimony portion of the hearing, the applicant will have to decide if the applicant wishes to submit further written argument. And under the statutes, argument is defined as assertions and analysis regarding the satisfaction or violation of legal standards or policies believed relevant by the proponent to decision. Argument does not include facts. Evidence means facts, documents, data, or other information offered to demonstrate compliance or non-compliance with the standards believed by the proponent to be relevant to the decision. Any submission by the applicant must be limited to argument. No additional evidence can be submitted. If the applicant wishes to make final written argument, no further deliberation shall take place tonight. If the applicant waives that right, the council may proceed with deliberation. And those are the announcements.
Thank you, I appreciate it very much. Staff presentation, please.
Good evening. I might be a little bit new to you. I'll give you a little bit of background. Originally from Michigan, moved to Colorado for a little bit.
To whom? who is addressing this?
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is Keith Leonard, Associate Planner. And, I'm originally from Michigan by way of Colorado and now here in Oregon. I'm very happy here to work for the city of Newberg, great city. So, Mayor Andrews, I'd like to enter into the record my staff report, MISC 318-0001, Exhibits A and B, and all 8 attachments. The request is to amend the 2008 development agreement for the Springbrook Master Plan. There are 8 new paragraphs that are being proposed by the applicant. The applicant is Polish Homes, and this is not a development proposal. This is purely involves the development agreement and how the city works with the developer and clarifies some specifics. This is the location map here that shows the Springbrook master planned area. This was a master plan area, and plan is also available on the internet for anybody who would like to see the future. First paragraph deals with the community development director's ability to use a type 1 administrative review to decide things like tree protection, infrastructure type, location and size, lot lines and lot areas, fence materials and colors, median breaks and locations, and phase boundary locations, and all these changes still have to meet the purpose of the 2008 Springbrook Master Plan. The second paragraph is the goalpost rule, and this basically means that the approval or denial of the application or any development application that's submitted shall be based upon the standards and criteria that were applicable at the time the application was first submitted. Third paragraph, paragraph 1.7, this deals with stormwater facilities, and the stormwater facilities, if there are any involved, have to meet the city's public works design and construction standards, and we've also asked that these facilities be limited. The fourth paragraph is 1.8, and this deals with the Chehalem Parks and Recreation Districts and acceptance of parks, and it basically means that the owner of a property within this area shall agree with this, the Parks and Recreation District on any ownership, if it's going to be private, public, and then the city is not required to accept any parks under this paragraph. And the CPRD did submit a letter of understanding that they do understand what this paragraph means. The fifth paragraph, 1.4.1, this deals with phase subdivisions. Phase subdivision schedule proposed in the tentative plan approval describing the expiration of a tentative plan for each subdivision phase, and when recording of the final plat for each subdivision phase shall be required, subject to the city's authority to modify the proposed schedule. Sixth paragraph, 5.2.11, in the event there's a conflict between the master plan and the agreement shall be the controlling document. Seventh paragraph, property owner that is party to the agreement may assign and transfer its interest in the agreement to another owner of property without an amendment to the agreement or the development agreement. Paragraph 5.2.13 deals with the public utility master plans, standards and system development charges and credits. In the event that we do receive a land use application or a limited land use application, at that date in which that's submitted, the public utility master plans and standards and systems development charges and credits that are in effect at that time would be the ones that are applicable to the application. Public comments, we received 2 in opposition during the Planning Commission phase of the review. One dealt directly with the development phase, so it wasn't really applicable to the development agreement. The second one dealt with utilization of a type 1 review process by the community development director, where he would have the ability to determine where or with a request from applicant where street locations and street sizes could be moved around. That was removed from the request and is no longer part of a Type 1 review. And we recently received a letter in support. It also dealt with the development stage. The comment basically reads that the Austin family and ADEC have done a good job here in the city, and that would be expected for any future development of the Springbrook master planned area. And my recommendation is the City Council adopt ordinance number 2018-2835, which approves the 2018 amendment to the 2008 Development Agreement Springbrook Master Plan. And that completes my presentation.
Questions of the council for staff? You did a good job. Thank you. There being no further questions, we will move into the area of public testimony. And I do have some people that have signed up to speak to us. And we usually take the proponents first, and then opponents, and then the undecideds. And I will indicate who these are. I remind the people, please keep your remarks to a 5-minute period. And to the subject, we are in a quasi-judicial hearing. So with that, I'm going to call on Brett Belfour. Is that correct?
Maybe Baker.
Oh, is that Baker? All right, Brett, come on forward. It looked like,
Is the applicant supposed to go first?
Yes.
not necessarily. I'm looking for proponents. Are you a proponent?
Yes.
Then come forward.
Mayor,
Trying to run your meeting.
Mayor, typically we would have the applicant present first.
Well, this does not indicate who is and who is not an applicant.
Is that,
So if
are you,
if you are not an applicant,
I think, Mayor, if you look at my sign-in sheet, it said I was testifying on behalf of the applicant.
And mine as well.
it'd be Mr. Robinson.
But I don't care.
all right, Brett,
Join it.
be patient.
I can do that.
All right. You going to do a toss-up, Michael? Is it you or Minnie?
We're going to come up together, Mayor.
All right.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. My name is Michael Robinson. My mailing address is 1211 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland, Oregon, 97204. I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant. With me at the table is Mimi Dukas, and I'll let Mimi give her mailing address.
My mailing address at AKS is 12965 Southwest Herman Road, Suite 100, Tualatin, Oregon, 97062.
Thanks, Mimi. Mr. Mayor, also here tonight is Mike Morris. Mike is the project manager for Polish Homes. Polish is purchasing a portion of the Springbrook master plan area and is the applicant for the development agreement amendment before you tonight. So our presentation will be brief, but please, if you have questions, ask us before you close tonight's hearing, and we will waive final written argument. We agree with the staff report's original recommendation to the Planning Commission and the recommendation to this council, and we certainly agree with and appreciate the Planning Commission's unanimous recommendation to this council that it approve the development agreement amendment. We agree with the staff report presented to you tonight, and with that, we ask that you follow the Planning Commission's recommendation and approve the development agreement amendment. The only thing I would emphasize is what Mr. Leonard already told you. This is not an application that approves any development, and it simply amends the development agreement. The development applications subject to public notice will come later. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Mimi, do you have anything?
Just for a bit of history, the Springbrook Master Plan was approved in 2006, and a great deal of time has passed since then. And what we are primarily trying to do is clarify where staff has discretion and what that process will be. it matches some of the conversations we had way back in the day, but a lot of faces have changed and time has passed, and we're just trying to take any gray area out of the conversation and clean up that document. So we're happy to be here tonight and answer any questions that you have.
Questions for either Michael or Minnie this evening? We did good.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Baker.
All right.
You're going to keep me honest here, huh?
Well, someone's got to. All right, Mr. Mayor, councilors, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Brett Baker, the president of Austin Industries, representing the Austin family, the owners of the master plan property, current owners. The family wants the development to honor Joanne's original vision. As you might recall, Springbrook started with the Allison Inn and Spa, which serves as an anchor for the master plan. With the economic downturn, the residential phase needed to wait. Now it makes sense to move forward to bring new homes to Springbrook and Newberg. We did a thorough and thoughtful outreach effort to find a development partner who fit the family's expectations for quality, integrity, and design. We selected Polish Homes. The Austin and Polish families are now working together to move forward on the next stages of the Springbrook Master Plan. These proposed amendments to the development agreement is the first step in that process. We support these amendments and request that the council vote to approve the application. Any questions?
That's for me to ask.
Okay.
Questions of the council for Mr. Baker? None appearing? Thanks, Brett.
Thank you, sir.
Very much. I have nobody else signed up. We have no opponents and we have no undecideds. Is there any closing remark that the applicant would like to make?
No.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate that. With that, I'm asking, are there any further communications that we have received in a written?
Only the one comment in support of that was sent out to the council on Friday.
All right. You all received that? Very good. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to close the testimony portion. I now go to the city attorney for our closing announcements.
Yeah, we did have waiver of the 7-day period. So the council then has, since that 7-day period has been waived, the council does have the ability to consider and make a decision tonight. The council has, but everybody should be aware that the council has the authority to reconsider the decision if a decision is made tonight following proper procedure. A motion to reconsider is usually required to be made at the next meeting of the city council. The fact that the council could reconsider their decision does not affect the length of time for appeal of that decision.
That concludes your remarks.
That concludes the announcements.
All right. And with that, we will close the public hearing. We'll move into deliberations. This is the first reading of ordinance 2018-2835. Pleasure of the council.
I'd like to make a motion that we waive the second reading.
It has been moved and seconded to waive the second reading. Is there any further discussion?
Who seconded?
Denise. No further discussion? Do I hear a call for the question? Question's been called for. All in favor of waiving the second reading signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. None appearing. The second reading has been waived. To the motion. Or to the ordinance. I'm sorry, to the ordinance, this constituting your adoption. The pleasure of the council. Ordinance 2018-2835. Council Bacon?
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve ordinance 2018-2835. Is it still read by title only? Read by title only.
That's right. You're correct. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded, Johnson, to adopt ordinance 2018-2835 and read by title only. I want to thank everybody, including the applicant, those people that took the time to testify, and especially the work that the Planning Commission and our staff have done to bring us this kind of a product. Thank you all very much. I sincerely appreciate it. I will be voting with an affirmative vote. Are there any other discussion or comments? Is there a call for the question? Question's been called for. This is a roll call vote, please. Yes, yes.
Ordinance number 2018-2835, an ordinance approving the 2018 amendment to the 2008 Development Agreement Springbrook Master Plan that was adopted by ordinance number 2007-2678.
Counselor Johnson?
Yes.
Counselor Corey?
Yes.
Counselor McKinney?
Yes.
Counselor Bacon?
Yes.
Mayor Andrews?
Yes. Ordinance 2018-2835 passes 601.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we will move to a community visioning program, public participation, and this is an informational item. Mr. Rux?
Thank you, Mayor. Doug Rux, Community Development Director. So City Council has as one of your goals, which is Goal 12, to complete a community visioning process and communication plan to engage Newberg residents. So you did this in September, came up with this goal of 2017. As we're approaching September of 2018 and looking at the fiscal year, staff had a communication with the University of Oregon through AmeriCorps and through their RARE program, which is Resource Assistance for Rural Environments, about the opportunity of getting a RARE participant to work on our community visioning program. So a RARE participant would be working with the city or for the city for a period of 11 months. You approved in the budget funds for our portion of the cost of that RARE participant, and the U of O through AmeriCorps pays the other portion of the cost for this particular participant. But community visioning is a big process. It takes a lot of work and a lot of activity. It takes a lot of community engagement in order to do that. And so in past experience in working on community visioning programs, we went back to the International Association of Public Participation, which is acronyms known as IAP2. And they have a spectrum of public involvement. So what's included in your packet is a nice little color chart in blue. But in that spectrum, they have the first levels calling informing the citizens. The second of those is that you consult with your citizens. The third is that you involve your citizens in the process. The fourth is to collaborate with your citizens in preparing a program. And of course, the last one is you empower the citizens, which is effectively saying, citizens, you make the decisions and all the choices, and then you just come tell the council, and the council goes through the implementation process. In using this model in the past, focused on the collaborative aspect of it. And so that's where city council, staff is working hand in hand with the citizens in order to create a vision of what their future could be, or what they want their future to be. In addition, the IAP2 model has a set of values, and those are listed out. There are 7 of them that are in your packet. The first one is essentially is that the population has the ability and the right to be involved in the process, which from other activities that we've done on master planning, councils have agreed with that principle. The next one, the second one in the short, is basically it's a public contribution. They can contribute to the process. It's your community's vision of what they want for their future. The third is dealing with sustainable decisions. And so you don't want to do decisions that are kind of one-off, and you can't keep that momentum going over time. And if you want to have a successful community visioning process, you want it to be sustainable. And if they work as we hope they do, as I've worked on others, 10 years later, they're still going, and the public is still engaged, and they're still involved. The next one is dealing with basically facilitating, and this is what the rare participant would help us do. Is this individual would facilitate stakeholder meetings, small group sessions, community open houses, working with different groups in different focus areas that are identified, and doing the wordsmithing on what the strategies and what the actions are, and what groups and organizations need to be involved, and who leads a particular action, but who's in the support role. The fifth one is dealing with the input from participants and designing how they participate. And so, when I previously said stakeholders, small group sessions, community forums, different ways, even online survey work, you talked about that at work session on your long-range financial planning. And so we're working on models for that. The sixth one is pushing that information back out. These processes, we're constantly gathering new information, we're synthesizing it, we're wordsmithing it, but it's pushing that back out to the population in the community as a whole so they can have another round of opportunity for input. And then the last one is that public participation communicates to participants on how their input affected their decision. So this is kind of the feedback loop overall. Now, we envision this process would take about 11 months to 12 months to go through. So the rare participant would have a lot to do. We are doing interviews this week on the potential candidates. The rare participant going through this process, if everything goes positively, they would start around September 10th. I will be back in front of you on August 20th outlining all of the steps that we would be going through that 11 to 12 month process for community engagement to create this community visioning program. Generically, I kind of start with, we might end up with 5 to 7 kind of focus areas or topic areas, but the community will tell us what's important. But others that we've seen, you may have something on public safety, you may have something on transportation, you may have something on land use, you may have something on social services, but the community will tell us what it is. We don't come in with a predetermined, but we generally have some idea of what those topic categories are going to be. The other aspect of this is we will need a citizens advisory committee, an ad hoc committee. I will be having conversations with the mayor and the city manager about who those may be. We need to bring that back to you so that when we engage in this program, we have a committee that's set up, and they will be doing a lot of heavy lifting as we go through the process. But remember, as always, this is not a process where somebody goes off and does a bunch of work and we bring a product to you at the end. You will get briefings all the way through as we go through each step in the process. That's all I have, Mayor.
Questions of Mr. Rux? Volunteers to sit on the committee. Oh, there's a hand up, sit on the committee. Councilor Bacon?
Yes.
Oh, you're a volunteer.
I'm volunteering.
Oh, you're a volunteer.
And he volunteered too.
And we have another volunteer over there.
Over here on the end.
There are two of them.
Well, I think the other part of this is we've already done some preliminary outreach. So we've done outreach to the school district, to George Fox, to CPRD, to the Rotary Clubs, to Kiwanis, to Providence, kind of the bigger organizations that are in the community before we even made our application to the University of Oregon to ensure that we had organizations and all of the individuals that they bring with them, is that they would be engaged in this process for Newberg. The other piece of this is, when you go back and think about Beyond the Vision 2020, which was the Chehalem Valley, based on the council goal, you were looking for a vision for Newberg. So we're looking at that. So this does not include the city of Dundee, but this is looking at, our 7.8 square miles within our city limits, plus within our urban growth boundary.
Good question.
Your question, go
Yeah,
ahead.
is there going to be any attempts to reach out to those who aren't typically at the table, the harder to reach populations that we often don't get to see?
Yes.
Like Unidos, like...
Yes. We will work with the city manager's office and with Rosa to do the outreach into our Latino Hispanic population. We will be working with social service organizations to try to reach out to those populations that are not involved. So these, like I mentioned earlier, these are really they really are comprehensive, but it takes a person who's leading this. So I will provide the oversight. The rare participant would be doing the day-to-day work, and Keisha Owens, our assistant planner, would be assisting the rare participant. We've kind of generically given the title that this is the community vision coordinator. So they've got to go out and they've got to be meeting with a lot of people. And so it's trying to pick up those rocks of those that aren't necessarily always engaged, because this is their community as well, and they should have input into what that vision is going to be.
Councilor Johnson?
One of the things I'd like to see in this process is if we do have general public meetings, try to get out to the different neighborhoods and different districts, because we always have stuff here at the public safety building, and I think partnering with the school district and maybe using one of their buildings, or even the local retirement homes and churches might be a good way to bring the road show to them. Yeah, hospital.
I've added that to my list.
Any other comments? Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it very much.
It's still light out, just so you know. Sorry. I'm sorry. I was overwhelmed by it.
By the light?
But because the last few times I got home at 11:30, so
Well,
it's
we haven't adjourned yet.
I know.
Council business. Ms. Sue?
Mr. Mayor, City Council, City Recorder Sue Ryan. I'm just giving you a brief update, as I did last time, on the filings to date for the election, which will be November 6, 2018. So to date, I have received filings for mayor from Nicholas Nick Moraes, Rick Rogers. For District 2, which is new since the last meeting, Elizabeth Rogers, Gemaroy. For District 4, which is also new since the last meeting, Patrick Johnson. And for District 6, Brad Sitton. So the filing for office closes August 7th, 2018, and I continue to get calls as people are all interested in helping make their democracy work. The second item that I have for you is a 2018 District 1 recruitment update. You know that Councilor Murray resigned from office on July 2nd, 2018 to take a new job in New York. He did represent District 1, and I opened recruitment the following day. Recruitment for this position will close on August 31st, 2018. To date, Elise Yarnell, and I apologize, I didn't put her last name correctly, Elise Yarnell Holloman, has applied for the position. Interviews for District 1 vacancy are scheduled for the council meeting work session on September 17th, 2018. Application materials are available online at City Hall or upon request from myself. I've also brought some and set them out tonight. So those are my two updates.
Any questions for Sue on the candidates, either for office or for filling vacant positions? Council attendance at the Newberg Old Fashioned Festival. I'm going to ask our city manager to detail kind of how we're involved in that, but I am letting you know that the mayor is going to be out of town at the mayor's conference in Florence, Oregon. So we now will have, our council president will be the acting mayor in his absence. So what's the status of, on the parade?
Rosa is getting it. Rosa's gotten our reservation in, and I'll get her to give you a time tomorrow when you're supposed to show up.
Okay. I believe I've heard that we will have the use of engine 3 again.
It's fire truck, I don't know which number.
Yeah, I think it's the old engine 3. Okay.
And Mr. Gano is going to do it again. He's going to drive you.
Roger Gano?
Yes, he
Okay.
agreed.
Very good. So that's on Saturday. I would encourage all of you, if you can, and be careful of the heat. There will be water and maybe some goodies also. I don't know. I don't know whether we're going to be behind or in front of Representative Post that's going to be supposed to be handing out candy. So there may be something there. August 3rd, we will not be convening before that. August 3rd at 4:30, there will be a groundbreaking dedication of the new addition to the Providence Newberg Medical Center, the new 60,000-foot addition. They're going to do a groundbreaking, and that's also the evening for the Hearts of Gold fundraiser for PNMC. And when did you say that you let me know that they were going to be having a dedication for the Oregon Clinic?
I believe that was September 20th, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So those are things you might want to put on your calendar. And that's all I have. Anything else for council business? I'll give you one more bite at the apple. And with that, we are going to recess and prepare to go into an executive session. And that executive session will be pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub H to consult with legal counsel concerning legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. So with that, we will clear the room